Well, hello, class. Well, unfortunately, as you know, we're not going to be able to meet via Zoom. At least I'm not going to be able to be on that meeting. You're welcome to join the Zoom meeting and talk with each other. But unfortunately, I'm unable to join because, as I mentioned in the email, I am taking on a new role with a company called Hatching Results, which you may have heard of. And so I'll be speaking around the country, providing services for counselors to help them grow in their programs. So as a result of that, I'm unable to be in the group for our live Zoom. So I figured I would spend a little bit of time recording something for you all, so at least you have that. As much as I'm really looking forward to meeting each one of you, I'll definitely see everything on the discussion boards this weekend, and I'll be able to connect with you then, and then we'll see each other on Zoom in a couple of weeks. So my apologies for not being able to meet with you all, but the good news is that you all have been in this program for a little while and you're familiar with how things kind of run. So I am going to spend some time going over what we have going on for this week and also share some details about group counseling to get you started. Things I would have said as we were meeting on our Zoom. So I'm going to share my screen with you real quick. And so now you should be seeing, yes, you are. Okay. When you go into the Zoom or into the Canvas, you'll see there's the welcome right there. If you click on that, you'll see the video that I posted, just the introduction. Hopefully you've already seen that, but if not, go in there and you'll see a video introduction from me. The syllabus is in here as well. Under the syllabus and textbooks, you'll see some required textbooks information there. Details about the program information and resources. You're probably already familiar with all of that. I always encourage students if you're, having any challenges with the APA resources or how to write in that scholarly voice, please reach out to the writing studio and get some support from them. And so here we are in week one. So this is today through, well, actually the 25th, 24th through the 30th, week one. And you'll see the recordings and for the readings for this week and here, as well as a Christian method message, and then our live session that unfortunately we're not able to do. But again, if you all want to jump on there just to talk with one another, that's certainly welcomed. So I did set up these Zoom connections in there. So all you have to do is click the link and you automatically go in there. There's no waiting room. There's no passwords, any of that kind of stuff. And then there's a discussion board that we'll do. That's just an introduction. So what I want to do today is really show you what I would normally show during our first session. And so that's what this is. I'm actually going to make this into a slide presentation for us. So what is group counseling in schools? As I mentioned in the introduction video, to me, this is such an important aspect of what we do as school counselors. It is, to me, one of the most important tools that is underutilized. And so I'm going to tell you why. Okay. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself, although I may have shared a little bit about that during my introduction. You can see some of the details here. The top there being my most recent gig that I am now starting as officially actually today, well, yesterday really. So that is as the professional learning specialist with Hatching Results, providing trainings for school counselors. I've also served as the director of school counseling at a high school in North Charleston. That was a Title I school, or is a Title I school. Previously, I've served in a high school also in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Previously to that, I was a school counselor in California for 5 years. I also served as a counselor in Georgia for 10 years. And originally, I got my master's in school counseling in New York, which is where I'm originally from. You'll also see I'm continuing to be I'm an adjunct professor for CUI as well as for the Citadel. I've also served as an adjunct for other colleges throughout the years in California as well as in Georgia. Currently, I'm the Palmetto State School Counseling Association co-chair for the conference. Actually, that says 23, but I'm also for the 24. And I'm serving as the director of emerging leaders. So in California, there's the emerging leaders program. I used to serve in that capacity in California for CASC. When I came here to South Carolina, they were all excited about that and said, "Can you do that here?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so I am running that program as well here in South Carolina. Shared already, I was also on the board of directors with the CASC board, and I was previously the high school vice president in CASC. So, other professional background, just so you know, I served as a mental health clinician, was a rehabilitation counselor. I served at Job Corps, if you're not familiar with that, as is a program for 16 to 24-year-olds, some of the most at-risk youth or at-promise youth that you can find in the country, because these are students who have typically already dropped out of high school and are going there for a GED, maybe a high school diploma, as well as a trade. I've served as a therapist in inpatient hospitals. I've served on the crisis hotline. So those phone calls at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning with somebody saying they're suicidal, I have been on the other end of that call. I always love to share that I'm a musician, and I served as a music therapy student intern at a variety of different age groups and populations in New York when I was studying for that. I always say this is so important. The most important thing I am is a husband and a father. And so, unfortunately, I'm not seeing you all, but I always like to pause here and say, the thing that we do in this field is we serve and we serve and we give and we give and we give. And it is a great thing to do. We have to have a special heart in order to serve students in education every single day. But it is also essential for us to take care of ourselves and to serve our home and our family the most. So, I love to highlight that. I actually do workshops around the country about your mental health mattering just as much as our students. So there's just a little bit about that side of things, and you can see my family right there. Actually, these pictures are a little bit older. That's amazing that my oldest is 21 years old, and I have a 20-year-old, 17-year-old, as well as a 10-year-old. So digging in a little bit. I love images. I love to share images because that's what helps us to kind of use our imagination. My father was a professional photographer for 35 years, and he's taught me to see things very differently. And so this image, I think, is a beautiful image. You can see just a neat kind of hue of the greens and the different colors and things that stand out. And so what Da Vinci said was learn how to see and realize that everything connects to everything else. And I would say, as you've considered what you've gone through in this program, and what you will see in this class, as well as every other class, is that everything does connect. Everything's leading you towards this ultimate goal of achieving this degree that will place you in a position where you can have the most impact on students. And so my encouragement to you is to continue to reflect on what you're seeing, what you're learning, what your professors have talked to you about, but also what you're learning from each other throughout this journey. In particular, in this class for group counseling, I think there's a lot of value in what the group can help each other with. I'm talking about your cohort, your class. In addition to the idea of when you're running groups, it's not about you providing all the information for your students, giving them all the answers, obviously. It's really about facilitating them within the group to develop and grow together. So the textbook we're going to use is called A School Counselor's Guide to Small Groups. I absolutely love this textbook, by the way. Not only because it has a great deal of information that will help guide you as to understanding the group process, but also there are sections in here that give you very, very specific examples. Like you can basically plug and play these materials in a group counseling setting. So if you're once you get into schools and you're serving as a school counselor, one of the biggest challenges is finding time to prepare and to have all the resources. Like, what do I do? How do I put all this together? I don't have time to create a whole new curriculum. Can I get this material somewhere? Anyways, this textbook has that. So it's fantastic for that. And so our first starting here in the foundation is what are groups in schools? What are some of the legal and ethical considerations? And then utilizing counseling competencies to design and deliver group work. So all of that is incorporated within the text. And then when they have those examples later on in the chapters, you'll see the incorporation of the standards that are used within the ASCA model. So I'm also going to share some other resources from some other textbooks that I've utilized, by the way, because I think there's things that you can pull from different resources that are really, really important. So here, some introduction to the group work. You'll see, obviously, we need to have informed consent. We have to understand confidentiality, skill level, and the appropriate topics for school counseling. As school counselors, we're not there to provide therapy. I'll probably know that already. We're not therapists in the schools. We're serving to provide social emotional care for students so that they're well equipped to learn every day, right? So there's going to be support there for sure, but we're not providing the deep level of therapeutic work that therapists would out in the community, or even if they were coming to our schools. Now, that may be something where you can partner with therapists in the area to come to your schools to provide those kinds of groups. But for our purposes, we want to make sure that we're choosing topics for groups that, number one, match the data that we have, right? Match the needs for the students that we have from our needs assessments and from what we utilize in terms of data to determine our groups, but also to ensure that we are well equipped, that we have the skill level to provide those particular groups, and anything that's not appropriate for us, that we're finding others that are within the community that can come in and do that. So some quick example of that is groups on, let's say, grief. I'm somebody who I think is pretty well familiar with that topic area. I've lost many people, but I've also gone through groups. I've trained in groups. I've learned a lot about groups in grief in particular. However, for me, I would rather actually have an agency that specializes in that come to our school and provide that if that's available. And that is something that more recently in the school where I just, I'm now leaving, but where I was just at, we partnered with a local agency that did that. They came to our school, they provided everything. They have the curriculum, they have everything there for us, and they just come in and do the program. And so we just had to select the students and make sure that it was appropriate for them. So there's an example for you. You may have the skill set, or you may even have some background, but it may be valuable to even have someone else come in to do that. But something that might be very, very appropriate for school counselors could be like just talking about coping skills, right? How do we manage emotions? Other things could be relating to apathy in school, right? How do we address the why? How do we address students who don't seem to care, and giving them some encouragement through that journey? Another group could be on, uh, let's say, academics, how to study well, how to work with others well, how to be proactive, how to be assertive, those kinds of skills, right? Other areas in terms of group work, others obviously would be parents. They have to be involved, not in the sense that they're going to be in the groups, but that they have to know what you're doing. And so you're providing them with information and certainly getting the consent from them. But there may be value, depending on your grade levels that you're serving, is informing your parents about the materials and asking them to find out how is your student doing as a result of this group. Then you'll have some other topics that can go over in terms of small groups and our own counselor values. And of course, multicultural considerations, right? When we're considering who are we selecting for our groups, what are the group dynamics going to look like? It's so important to understand the differences between cultures and how are you addressing that? How are you being very cognizant and intentional about the way in which you're serving students' needs? Of course, there's the ASCA School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies, and you want to make sure that you're connecting what you're doing to the ASCA national model. This link will open up to more details about that. So obviously the mindsets and behaviors and how that would apply to groups. So if you were to do this and you check out groups, you'll see a variety of standards that specifically relate to the group process. Okay. So I think it's important to know that there's actually 16 matches. Not all of them are actually about small groups, but it could be larger small groups. But it's so important to see that groups are an important aspect of what we are supposed to be doing in schools. Okay. So hopefully you see that and see the value here, not only because of my passion, but because of what the national model says we need to do, right? Okay, so going back here. And I just kind of pulled some of those resources from the national model right there, or I should say from the standards. And so here's some things in relation to the chapter. Again, personal reflection questions would be, what are your own attitudes, right? And then your own knowledge about groups. There's a lot of different great questions in here, but how can How can critical self-reflection processes help you navigate dynamics of culture and power in small groups, right? So again, self-reflection, understanding the dynamics of culture and power. How prepared are you to facilitate group work with marginalized groups? How can you foster cultural humility in group work and consider the implications of doing this internally and within the small group? The knowledge, like who are the student groups at your school who are not being adequately or competently served? And how can you address those opportunity gaps? What are some of the barriers related to group facilitation at your school? One of the biggest issues that I hear from counselors is time. And where can we fit this in, not only for the school counselor, but also within the schedule? If students are in a block schedule per se, and they only have 4 blocks, and they're in mostly academics, like how do you fit that all in? And there are ways of doing that. We'll talk about that as we go through here. So being able to understand what those barriers are and how can we address those barriers. And then what kind of specialized training might you need in order to provide socially just group counseling services to marginalized students in schools? So great questions to be asking yourself as you're reflecting through the chapter. And then in terms of skills and action, how can you ensure that small group counseling spaces are affirming all students? All students. How might you advocate for students to have small group experience, right? How do we make sure that this is something that is part of what we do, not just like oh, I wish we could do it, but it's just embedded into our school counseling program. And how can small groups be used to address issues of multiculturalism, diversity, social justice at your school? In terms of action in your personal life, what kind of social action can you engage in to help you learn more about the diverse needs of your students? A good example of this, I'm somebody who just continues to love to learn, right? I think that's part of what we do in education. And recently I read a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And if you're not familiar with that book, I absolutely encourage you to read it or listen to the audio. The author reads through it in the audio, and it's fantastic. But things in there that just kind of challenged me to think about my own perspective, how I grew up. Fortunately, I did grow up in a diverse area right outside of New York City and was exposed to a lot of different cultures and diversity. But that doesn't mean that I really understood what like my best friend Chris his life was like growing up. And so and he grew up in poverty like I did, but he was a black kid who was in a different kind of we're both in a kind of really tough neighborhood. But I didn't have the same kind of experiences as he did because I remember having conversations and just how racism had an impact on him, even though we were in New York and in a culturally diverse area. There's a difference sadly, between a white kid that walks into, let's say a 7-Eleven versus, a black kid that walks into the 7-Eleven and the impressions that that store owner may have had. And that was something that he lived with. I'm just kind of sharing an example from my own personal life that I remember those conversations with my friends. So just again, being able to step back and think about what are your own biases or your own experiences and how can you grow through that? How does understanding the critical need for groups in schools inform your perspective or practice? And how will you use group work to advocate for your students and their academic, social, and emotional success? Okay. So here's some information from Corey. There's the Corey's textbooks are actually 3 authors named Corey. So number 1, groups are not a second-rate approach to helping people change. So important. It's not second-rate. It is a treatment of choice. And groups offer a natural laboratory where people can experiment in new ways of being. Absolutely love that concept because this tells you that there's an opportunity for you to help students to practice certain skills or to practice, let's say, role playing. How can they be assertive or how can they ask questions and practice those skills within class with a teacher, let's say, that they're having difficulty with? or a concept that they're having difficulty with, and you want to ask a question. So that's just an example. Things that they can use in that group process as a laboratory. Okay. There's also power in group. Participants experience their interpersonal difficulties being played out in the group. And this is the fascinating thing about the group process that you don't get in individual counseling. I mean, a little bit, I would say. There is some piece of that. But I would say you see it a lot more in the group process, especially over time. And so just be aware of that. And something you'll certainly read more in the text about. But I think it's so valuable to know that within that group process, you're going to see these interpersonal challenges happen. And that's an opportunity for them to grow. In addition, you can see the group process, the elements that are involved in there. Some, for example, would be the group norms. Some people say you can set that up by asking them all these different questions. What do you want to be your norms? I would share with you, Irvin Yalom, who's one of the gurus on group therapy, would say just kind of give them a list and go with that, you know. But anyway, that's group norms, generating trust and cohesion. Top uh, important thing you need to focus on in the beginning is generating trust and that cohesion. Conflict and reluctance, intermember feedback, so them providing feedback to one another is so important. The healing forces within the group and the stages of the group development. And so there's a variety of various different stages that the group goes through. It's not necessarily like a linear path, but it kind of goes in this direction. So we'll talk about that as well. Important to know the difference between group process versus techniques, right? So the process itself, that's the elements that are the unfolding of the group from beginning to end. So those norms and the trust and conflict, how that emerges, and patterns of resistance. The techniques, this is what you're going to utilize, these different interventions that you're providing or implementing to help facilitate the movement. That's a great word, movement within the group. So that might be, for example, in the beginning, conducting those interviews so that you know who's going into the group and you can create a group that's going to mesh well. Asking a member to role play, I mentioned that earlier. Challenging a member's belief system, right? But in a way that's going to be very respectful and also encourage them to grow, right? And then perhaps suggesting some homework, something else we'll talk about later. So, of course, leading groups can be powerful, right? Human connection and collaboration can produce magnificent results. And this is something I firmly believe. I've been in groups myself, several of them over the years, and I can tell you this is such a powerful tool. If you've ever been in a group, let's say you've been in a life group through church, right? There's such power in doing life together, right? The group process in terms of counseling is similar to that in the sense that you have this opportunity for this human connection with their peer group that can help them grow and develop together. Oh no, the picture didn't work. This is supposed to be a picture with a bunch of little children. Anyways, it says, but always remember to have a childlike mindset. So be open, be curious, and non-judgmental. Oh, there it is. All right, picture worked. Okay, so an overview of different types of groups. I just want to make sure that you all are understanding, as I mentioned before, we're not doing therapy. We're not doing the bottom one there. It says psychotherapy. That's not our process in the schools as school counselors. But there could be, could be a task group, psycho-ed group, could be counseling groups in the sense of preventative and educational purposes. Could be brief groups, time-limited, structured, right? Just keep in mind that, like I said, the psychotherapy groups, those are your more in-depth psychological processes that you're going to do. That you're not going to do, I'm saying, but that would be more for therapists that are going to be working perhaps in the schools or outside of the schools. So what does it take to be a group therapist or a group counselor as a person? Obviously, there's a whole variety of different skills here or different attributes and characteristics. Courage is on the top. You have to be courageous. You have to be willing to lead a group and stumble, right? I think it's so important to share this now. Just like counseling in general, you're not going to have all the answers, and that's okay. The most important thing you can do is be present. Most important thing you can do is reflect what's happening emotionally for your students. And the same thing is true within the group context. your presence is what matters most, and facilitating them to be present with one another, encouraging them to grow together. So we'll talk more about that as we go through, but I just want you to know it does take courage, but you have to be willing to just take that step. Willingness to model. You're going to be the model for the group norms, really, and to help train them in providing feedback in a positive, healthy way, in a respectful way. Again, the presence is so important. Goodwill, genuineness, and caring. Here's the key thing right here. This is probably also should be at the top, which is belief in the group process. You really have to believe that this works. So if you haven't had experience in groups, then my encouragement is go to a group, check it out, experience that for yourself, and see how powerful it can be. Openness, non-defensiveness when coping with criticism. That's a hard one, right? I've been in groups, especially when I was earlier on, where I experienced that criticism. And you have to be able to step back and not take it so personally, right? You got to be able to respond with a level of non-defensiveness so that you can model the best way of managing that kind of feedback to your clients, to your students. Becoming aware of subtle cultural differences, right? Being able to identify with a client's pain. So obviously empathy is so, so critical here. Personal power, believing in yourself, having stamina because it's, it can be quite emotional at times. Can also be challenging at times, especially when you're interacting with students who maybe don't get along all the time. Commitment to self-care, as I mentioned earlier on. Self-awareness, right? The more you can learn about yourself, the better that you can lead others. Sense of humor, right? It's okay to laugh. Inventiveness. So we do have to be creative in this process. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to come up with like the whole structure of a group from beginning to end. That there's plenty of resources out there, but inventiveness is really in the moment, being able to breathe and notice what's happening, and then being creative in how you're going to respond. Okay. And then personal dedication and commitment. All right, so we all have to take risks if we're going to fulfill our dreams. And so you've all taken the risk of being in a program to learn from this program. I would say for a lot of students that I work with, I'm talking about grad students, the sense of doing groups, the concept of doing groups can be very overwhelming. And even when I talk to seasoned counselors, sometimes they haven't done groups, especially at the high school level, it seems just more hesitancy because of the time factor there, especially. But you got to take risks. You got to be willing to do it. And I think the reward of that is so much greater. So I encourage you to hang with me in this. And my hope is that between now and the time we finish this class, you're going to be super excited about doing groups and say, yes, I'm going to do them. So just take a moment to reflect. When you consider that list of attributes, and you consider what I've already shared with you, what are some of the risks that you might have to take as you venture into becoming an effective group counselor? Okay. So I know it says group therapist. I need to change the title there. This comes from, like I said, a variety of different resources. Some of it's from Irvin Yalom, as well as from the CUI textbooks. So that's why I have some where it says group therapist. But you're not therapists in the school, okay? You're counselors. But you still have to create a group climate that fosters interpersonal norms such as openness and directness, respect and concern for one another. So that's an important piece, is that you want to develop in the first couple of sessions a caring for one another, connection with one another, an openness, right? A level of respect for one another. And then the next bullet point there is leaders' interpersonal skills, genuineness, empathy, and warmth are significant variables in creating the kind of climate that leads to successful outcomes. So just keeping in mind your interpersonal skills, your genuineness, your empathy, really your presence is so, so key. And then you'll see this note here. Encourage vulnerability. That can be really hard, especially with young people, right? Teenagers don't always like to be vulnerable. But again, if you're able to help that process, even by modeling a little bit, you'll see them start to open up. So this video is something I'm not going to show right now, but my encouragement for you is to watch it. And unfortunately, like you're not seeing the thing right here, but it is Brene Brown. So you can see that little picture right there for a second. But Dr. Brene Brown is an amazing resource if you're not familiar with her. I'm just going to open up her page for a second. So this is that links to this, and I'll post this PowerPoint so you can have it. But if you'll watch this video, um, it is such a powerful video. If you've not seen it, definitely watch it. If you've seen it already, watch it again. But this is what she posted in 2010. Obviously, it's blown up with 65 million views. And she talks about vulnerability, but she talks really about shame and her research on shame and how important it is to be vulnerable. And that is the birthplace of creativity, birthplace of being wholehearted. And so I encourage you to watch this. It is listed actually in week 8, but I say go ahead and do it now. I'll put something else in week 8 that'll be a good follow-up to this. So that's my encouragement for you this week is to do that. Maybe that's something you can do tonight since we're not meeting. So developing group leadership skills, just know that you're not going to have it all figured out day one after you graduate, right? It's going to take some time to acquire this and practice. So we're going to do some of that practicing in this class. So it's essential to acquire and refine your skills. Keep refining your skills. And they're not going to be separate from your personality. You still got to be you, right? And then learning how to use group skills is an art. So like any art, it requires practice, right? I'm a musician. Shared that with you all in my first video. I've been doing it for years. That's a craft. It's an art. It's something that takes practice and practice and practice. So the same thing is true with the group process. So just know that you may be clumsy to begin with, but you'll eventually be able to have a very strong sense of competence and confidence in what you're doing in those groups. And these skills are learned through supervised experience, practice, feedback, and participation as a member. And that I think is so critical. If you haven't been told already, as a group counselor, or as a counselor in general, it is absolutely essential to sit on the other side of that chair or that table, whatever. When I have counseling, I don't ever have anything in between us in terms of a table, but to sit on that chair, the client's chair, that is an essential part of learning how to become a counselor or a therapist. The same thing would be true in terms of groups. And so there's going to be an opportunity during this term where you're going to observe a group. And so that would definitely be something that I would be thinking about now. Where can I do that? And there's a variety of resources I can share with you all for that. But to observe a group, but also maybe to participate in one if you've never done that before. Okay. And here's a variety of different leadership skills, including active listening, right? Reflecting, clarifying, summarizing, facilitating, empathizing, interpreting, questioning, linking. Linking is so key, right? From week to week to week, it's about you really being able to help bring something from the previous sessions that are going to be relevant right now. Someone might say something and it's like, do you remember when so-and-so said this? That makes a lot of sense with what you're talking about right now. Confronting when needed, right? And that can be difficult, that can be challenging, but there's ways of doing that that can be very, very effective. There's some great resources I can share with you about that, particularly from Irvin Yalom. Supporting, blocking, assessing, modeling, suggesting, initiating, and then evaluating and terminating. So the evaluation process is also very, very key when it comes to your group process. Okay, so you want to continue to evaluate, is this working? Is this effective? What do I need to do to maybe shift things so that it's better? And then termination of any kind of process with counseling is so key. And that's, before you get to the end of the group, you're talking about ending the group so that you're preparing their minds for that as well. So the good thing is that you don't do it alone, right? You have a team. Usually in schools, particularly in middle school and high school, you'll have a team of counselors. Now, you may not have that necessarily in the elementary school. Sometimes you do. But if you don't have somebody else in the elementary school, then who can you connect with that is also in the elementary schools that can help you, that can guide you, that can give you some pointers, that maybe has that experience already? But usually within the high school settings and middle school levels, you're going to have other counselors that you can partner with to provide these groups. And so work with them. The other thing that's so great is that you can utilize interns. So eventually, as you grow in this field, you'll be able to supervise interns, and that will give you the opportunity to bring them in, and they can partner together to work on these groups with you. And just again, to hit on this multicultural perspective, obviously, cultural encompasses the values, beliefs, and behaviors that are shared by a group. It is learned in groups, right? Culture is learned in groups. And effective group work involves considering the culture of the participants. And then cultural similarities and differences need to be addressed in that group. Okay. Things will come up, basically what this is saying. Things are going to come up that if you're not attentive to that, then you're missing it, right? You might miss something that's really, really important. You may not. So yeah, I'll leave it at that because there's opportunities for us to talk more about this. And then the culturally skilled group counselor, group therapist needs to be aware of their own personal values, their own attitudes, their own biases and assumptions and prejudices, right? The more we can get in touch with who we are and where we come from, the better we can be prepared in our own hearts and our own minds to serve well. Also, to have a general knowledge about the ways the diverse backgrounds of members may affect the group process, right? Some may be more open than others. Some may culturally have certain ways of responding in situations that may be different than the way in which your culture is, right? A good example. I mean, I grew up in an Italian family, right? There's a lot of hand movements and a lot of loud talking. Whereas, if you're in a Japanese culture, that's not that's not okay. You're very respectful and you may not be as talkative and you may not even always look at people in the eye, right? So just being cognizant of those differences. And again, being able to implement interventions that are appropriate for those life experiences of the members of the group. And then, of course, it is so, so important to be able to have difficult conversations about culture and about race. Now, this may come up in certain groups. Kind of naturally, something may come up that's as a result of whatever the group topics are, or even just what might be happening around campus. Now, let's say you're, for example, having a group that's talking about academics, right? A group of students who are not doing well in school. Maybe they're apathetic. Maybe they have struggled with attendance and their behaviors or their grades are low. And you've got this group of students and maybe they're from diverse backgrounds. Maybe you have some that are Hispanic, some that are Black, some that are white, some that are Asian, right? You have a group of students in there that have different cultural backgrounds. And there may be some assumptions that are made from some students over the other students. And that might come up. They might say something like, oh, you live over on that side of town, right? Well, what is that supposed to mean? Right. So being able to address what might be happening there. Or maybe they assume, oh, the Asian kid, you're probably really good at math, right? It's these subtle things that might be said or underneath the surface that they're thinking. And you can take the opportunity to help break down barriers, break down assumptions, break down the things that unfortunately are deep in there for some of us, or probably all of us to certain degrees. So how can we help address that within the group that's going to transform and build more unity and connection and growth within the group for each other? So again, recognizing being open about your racial biases, encouraging a discussion about feelings, paying more attention to the process than to the content. The process is so key. And then encouraging and support people who are willing to take the risk of expressing themselves, right? So if somebody speaks up and says something that is really, really vulnerable, to encourage that and to support them in that, and being willing to step back and allow some space for that, and being grateful that they did that, and sharing that gratitude. Okay. So Andre Giddy said, "Man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the land." So think about that, to lose sight of the land. And so here's a wonderful image that I uh, I saw this in California, actually, in Laguna Beach. There was a muse not a museum, an art sh shop there, basically. And my father and I were walking through there, and this is all Vladimir Kush's work. And this one in particular just was one that really stood out. And if you notice, this boat is out, and again, losing sight of the land. So you can see there's a vast, let's say, ocean out there that this sailboat is going to. You have to be willing to go beyond the land, beyond what's comfortable. And so that might be how you feel about groups. But my encouragement to you is that what happens when we go on these adventures? Well, sure, there might be risks. Maybe you'll make a mistake. Maybe you'll say something that you shouldn't have said. Or maybe you'll see students that'll have situations that you feel really uncomfortable with. And it's hard. The truth is that's okay, guys. What happens when we go on these adventures? Well, we come back different. We come back as somebody who's grown so much. Or maybe we don't come back and we keep going and we find a new place to be. But no matter what, we're growing and we've learned something. And so that's my encouragement to y'all. But speaking of transformation, what you may or may not have noticed already as you've looked at this image is that this is a double image. So there's this beautiful scene with the boat, but there's also another image that's embedded within it of a beautiful woman. And so if you haven't seen it, if you look at the clouds, this is her hair. Right here is her nose and her lips and her chin and her eyes, or eye. So hopefully you can see the value of seeing beyond what is comfortable and being encouraged to take that next step in the adventure. So, of course, now we have these conversations, or they start off with these wonderful things, and you're probably wondering about that syllabus, right? Hopefully, you've already taken some time to look at this, but I'm going to open this up for you. So, what I always love about Concordia's classes is that they are very well structured, and you can see uh, week one, boom, week two, week three, and then you just kind of go through what's in there. What I also like is that everything obviously aligns when you go to the home, and for each week you can very quickly go to what's set up for that week. So it aligns perfectly with this. Okay. So for this week we have chapters 1 and 2, and then you can see this tells a little bit more about group counseling. Read through that. The Ask a Group Counseling position statement, which I kind of hit a little bit on in the PowerPoint or the slides. And then again, we're not doing the live session, but you're watching this. And so that's taking the place of that. But you're welcome to jump on there and meet each other and talk. And then there's a discussion board that you're going to do where you're going to do a little introduction. And so what I'd love for you all to do is, in addition to this introduction to who you are, and again, you have to post that by Thursday and then do 2 responses by Sunday. Besides that, though, I'd love for you to, and after watching this video, I'd love for you to do one other little activity that I'm going to share with you at the end here. And so that's what we have for this week. But what I want to obviously jump to is things to kind of be aware of that are going to be coming up, right? And so I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Actually, I'm going to, yeah. So week 2, at the end of the week, you're going to have your first assignment, and that's a case study assignment. So I'll open that up so you can see that. Okay, so there's going to be 3 scenarios provided right here, and you're going to do kind of a case study with 2 of those 3. Okay, so basically kind of figuring out what would you do? You're a school counselor. Here's the scenario. How are you going to handle that? Okay, and so you're going to write that up, and again, making sure that you're using this rubric, following along that to make sure you get all the points, right? But most importantly, I always like to make sure students keep this in mind. This is so critical, because this is going to be your first paper for me. And you've probably already done this in all your other classes, but when it comes to any paper, make sure that you're using APA format, but make sure you're also using citations throughout your work. So within every assignment that you have, you should be tying it back to what you're reading in the textbook. And that's your citations. And then, of course, your reference section would be the course textbook. And again, if you use something from, let's say, the ASCA model, whether it be from the standards or from the main ASCA website, that's a great resource as well. So my encouragement, again, is to make sure that you're really thinking through how can I incorporate what I'm reading within anything I'm writing. Okay. Okay, so that's the assignment for that. Um, Scrolling down, so that's week 2, basically next Sunday. As we go through, you'll see there's, let's see, discussion board. Keep going, week 4, that's when our assignment number 2 is, and that's the experiential group involvement. So you can see this. Okay, so each of you is going to lead a group, right? How cool is that? So in our online synchronous session, you are going to lead a group of your peers. Okay, so kind of getting your mindset, thinking about that, right? And so you're going to kind of, I don't even say pretend, you're going to be leading your classmates. So, and through that, so you be thinking about how can you prepare for this? What issues and topics can you discuss? Can you think about to kind of stimulate some conversation? Consider what your biggest strengths are as a leader. What strengths did you observe in your classmates that you'd like to replicate as far as like after you've observed others doing what they did? And what areas would you like to improve and grow and learn? Okay. This is an encouragement to use the lesson plan format that's from the ASCA model. So as you're thinking about how am I going to lead this group, take a look at this and think, okay, I'm going to utilize, one of the, this is my objective for this. I'm going to use this mindset and this behavior standard from the ASCA model. And this is how the process is going to go for my group. Okay. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a pre-test and post-test for this particular assignment or this practice session that you're doing, but this is just to kind of give you an overview and an idea of how to structure things. But generally, I would say you can start off with something like a little icebreaker, something to kind of get your group to be engaged, and then dig into some questions that are going to be relevant to your class. Okay. And then you can see the syllabus or the rubric for this particular assignment. And so just again, making sure you're using APA, making sure you're using your references and citations from the textbook. Okay. Okay, whoops. All right, and so that's what you're going to be doing during week 4. Okay. And as we move down, we'll have that live session here. And that's when you're going to actually do your assignment 4. And then week 6, there's a discussion board, and then there's this assignment. So remember I mentioned to you that there's going to be an opportunity for you to observe a group. That's what this is. So you're going to observe a group. And here it says not a counseling session. So not like a one-on-one session, but a group. Now, here's the thing. We're all on summer break, right? So maybe there'll be an opportunity for you to be able to go to a school and see some summer group that's going on. But if not, my encouragement would be to utilize some other kind of group to check out, right? And so that might be some local agencies. It could be at a church. It could be at a number of things. And then to write about what you observed. So the name and the purpose of the group, whether it's the frequency of their meetings, their groups, all that kind of stuff. You'll go through the role of the leader, the structure, all that kind of stuff. So again, you have a couple of weeks to figure out where you're going to do this or who you're going to observe, but be thinking about that now. Okay, where can I? And I'll post some options for you to think about. Okay, and then week 7. We'll have our last live session at that point. And that's when you're going to do that presentation about, where did I go? And so assignment 4, this is your group session report. So in groups of 3 or 4, this is when you're going to design an 8-session group. Okay, so that's something I usually do during this first meeting. And so I'm going to have to take a look at our class list, and I'll send something out to everybody so that you can be paired up, or not paired up, but put in groups of 3 or 4. And so the group of you are going to come up with an 8-session group lesson plan together. And so that's why getting to know who that's going to be earlier on is going to be really valuable for you. And so you're going to go through and come up with lessons for those 8 sessions. Okay. And so you can see all that. You're going to decide what kind of group are we going to do, what's the goals and rationale, do some review of literature as to why that's important. And then align them with the ASCA mindset and behavior, and go through some of these different things so you can see that. And then here's your rubric again and how you would pull all that together. I'm sure you're going to have questions about all this stuff, but I want to just kind of give you a visual of this so you have an idea of what's coming up. Okay. And so that is the major assignment right there that you're going to present actually to the whole class during this session, this live session that we have week 7. Okay. And then the last week, you'll have just an article review. Okay. So that's the other main assignment. So you'll read an article that's related to what we've been talking about in groups, and then you'll do follow the rubric for that. Okay. That's a pretty straightforward one. Okay, so normally I would be asking you, what kind of questions do you have? And I'm sure you're going to have plenty, but at least this gives you a quick overview of the syllabus and the assignments that are going to be due for the class. You can always go down to the bottom here and see these weekly assignments and click on each one of those to review them more in depth. Okay, this gives you more details about grading and all that kind of stuff. So please review everything that's on here. Spend some time digging in, getting a better sense of that. I will send out the matching of the groups. Okay. I'll figure out how to do that kind of more. I'll just do a random kind of selection for each one of you. And then that way you can start connecting with one another sooner rather than later. Okay. All right. So what I think, is important to kind of keep in mind is that there's lots and lots of great research out there, and that's what you're going to see in the textbook. Such great research about why groups are so valuable. And so my encouragement to you is to be the hands that support research in action. Right? Just because it's research and we know it's great doesn't mean that it's actually being done enough. And so my encouragement to you as future school counselors is to say, wow, this stuff is really, really good. There's a reason why groups are so valuable. So I need to figure out how to make sure that I put this into practice when I'm a school counselor. Okay. So almost done here. I want to make sure I hit on this. And again, I mentioned there's a few different resources out there. Irvin Yalom, like I said, he's like the guru for groups. So what he talked about in one of his textbooks is several actually shares it in many places, but he has a textbook specifically called Group Therapy. And he discusses in detail the 11 therapeutic factors within groups. And so I'm just going to touch on this real quickly and encourage you at some point, perhaps after you graduate from this program, to get his thick textbook that's like 700 or 800 or 900 pages. But there's such value in that. I've taught classes at other programs, really within the marriage and family therapy programs, that discusses group therapy in that textbook. So my encouragement for you is to know that that is a fantastic resource that is very, very much in depth, but it is so, so critical in terms of understanding group process. So these 11 therapeutic factors include the installation of hope, and that's the encouragement that recovery is possible or that this group process is going to work. Universality, which is the feeling of having problems similar to others, that they're not alone, which is so, so valuable within the group process, right? Imparting information, there may be some teaching about a problem in the recovery process. Altruism, helping and supporting others. Corrective recapitulation of the family of origin issues. So that's identifying and changing the dysfunctional patterns or roles one played in the primary family. Now, again, that's something that's more going to be in a psychotherapy group, not necessarily in school counseling, but just valuable to be aware of this stuff. Developing socializing techniques, right? Learning new ways to talk about feelings, observations, and concerns, right? That's like that laboratory that we were talking about earlier. Imitative behavior. So you're modeling another's behaviors, another's manners, and their recovery skills. Interpersonal learning, right? Finding about themselves and others from within the group. Group cohesiveness, so, so key. This is like that feeling of belonging to a group and valuing the group. In fact, Yalom would say that the group, being at the group every week or whatever, however often it met, should be one of the most important things in that person's life, that they don't miss it for anything. Like it's just one of those things that they value so much because of this sense of belonging. And number 10, catharsis, right? This release of emotional tension that happens within groups and especially within group therapy. You may see that in group counseling within schools too, depending on what your topic area are. And then, of course, existential factors involving like what is life and death and the realities of all of that. So obviously, there's so much more detail about these different therapeutic factors, but I wanted you to just see this visually for a minute and know that there's so much more to dig into. And my encouragement is for you to do that at some point. Okay, so here's the fun thing I want you to do. I'm not going to read through all this stuff because time has already gone by so much, but I want to give you this as just a fun thing to do. And it's called a whack on the side of the head. And so if you'll read through each one of these scenarios, my encouragement to you between now and Sunday, or maybe even now and Thursday, so you can write about it in your discussion board, is to give yourself a whack on the side of the head. Do something different, right? Get out of the typical routines. And that might be something as simple as taking a different route when you're driving to and from, let's say, work or from school or whatever, right? Do something different on that route. Changing viewpoints, might be looking at something from a different perspective, seeing the bigger picture. It's very easy for us to kind of get into the weeds of things, but if we can pull ourselves out and really think from a broader perspective, there's so much more we could see. And I love this other idea of trying a random idea. Talks about this Indian medicine man, basically, who encouraged the tribe to find new pathways to new game by just doing something that was relatively random. And so perhaps that for you might look like, in here it says like, take your finger and open up a book and pick a word and talk about like, what does that mean to you? Think about that. Okay. Maybe you go to the Bible and find a verse and say, gosh, what does that mean to me today? Okay. So that's my encouragement to you, just some kind of fun activity to do. So, all that being said, I am certain that you have lots and lots of questions, and that's okay. Um, as I said, although I'm out of town, and this week is going to be really kind of nonstop through Thursday, I'm sorry, Thursday night, probably Friday morning. Just know that you're welcome to email me. You're welcome to connect with me, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. If we need to even set up a time to meet, I'm glad to do that via Zoom. I'm sorry that I'm not able to have the regular Zoom meeting on Tuesday evening with you all, but my hope is that this has given you a good introduction to things. You can see my excitement for group counseling, and my encouragement is that between now and the end, that you're going to feel this too. Okay. So I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day and your week, and I look forward to seeing you in person or seeing you on Zoom soon. But in the meantime, I look forward to us connecting through the discussion boards, seeing your emails and stuff like that, but also the chats and all that. So feel welcome to reach out and have a blessed rest of your day. Thank you.